Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. This is our pre-show live stream for Season 2, Episode 4 of House of the Dragon. As always, two reminders just before we get going. The first one is a spoiler reminder. There will be spoilers for what has happened in episodes 1 to 3 of House of the Dragon, and also what happens next in the books. The books have been out for a while, so I consider book spoilers fine. Show spoilers, what's going to happen this next episode, are not okay. So that's the first one. The second thing to say is that this is, as are all of my pre-show live streams during episodes or season 2 of House of the Dragon, this is a charity live stream. So what I'm not going to talk about it too much, but if you appreciate the show, if you appreciate these live streams, what I'm asking is that instead of doing super chats or super thanks or anything like that, if you can and you can afford it, then please be as generous as you can. The charity we're supporting here is International Rescue, who's a fantastic organization founded by Einstein, incidentally, and the idea was that they were going to go to the places and the people that are being impacted by the worst of human suffering, war zones, natural disasters, and do two things. Firstly, provide the instant help that they need, whether that's shelter, food, medicine, whatever. And then secondly, go in and give them the longer term help they need to just get back up onto their feet so that they can help themselves in the longer term. So please do be generous. We've raised a reasonable amount so far, but I'm keen to get that number as high as possible. So thank you very much. So that's it in terms of sort of notices. Let's get into this. The other thing I find somebody always asks, the show itself is going to be starting in about 4 hours from now. So we will be doing this live stream, will be 2 hours, give you a couple of hours off just to grab something to eat, walk the dog, whatever it is you want to do. I will start out just quickly reminding you what happened in episode 3. Then we will go through some questions. So episode 3. So far during this season, each of these episodes has been largely framed around reactions to something that happened just a bit ago. So episode 1 was reactions to the battle over Blackwater Bay when Aemond killed Lucerys. Episode 2 was how are people reacting to Blood and Cheese. Episode 3 is really reacting to two things. First of all, what happened with the Cargill twins, which, again, I think was an amazing bit of TV. And also what happens at the beginning of this episode, which is a border dispute, or it starts as a border dispute between houses Bracken and Blackwood. Now, book readers will be very aware of these two houses. They have been at war for on and off thousands of years. And the exact start of this is lost in the mists of time. Obviously, they both have accusations against each other, but they are almost always looking for some excuse to be, if not at war with each other, then getting the upper hand over the other. And what we see here is one of those moments. It's a small border dispute. You moved the rocks this way. No, I didn't. But it soon shifts into a new excuse. And the new excuse this time is the two sides. They have chosen different sides. Of course, they have chosen different sides in this pending civil war. The Brackens have chosen Team Green. The Blackwoods have chosen Team Black. Now, this is important because we talk about this being a civil war, the Dance of the Dragons. It's not really happened yet in terms of actual land battles. In fact, all we've really had so far are assassination attempts, just like a bit of a dragon scuffle, that kind of thing. Not real full-scale civil war. This is the first of those. And although we know, everybody knows that really this is just the Brackens and the Blackwoods attacking each other as they always do, because they claimed that this was due to one of them supporting Rhaenyra, the other one supporting Aegon, suddenly everybody has to react to this. So, first of all, we go to the Green Council. And I've been quite cynical about the Green Council. I have to say, they've not been particularly effective. They've had a lot of divisions going on here. They do actually have a reasonable discussion about how to respond, and they've got a number of options. They could try and get the Tullys, who are the Lords Paramount of the Riverlands, involved, but they're very aware, everybody's very aware, Grover Tully is very old and he's very ineffective. And so nobody's really going to pay much attention to them. So they could wait for their two armies to come from the west. There's a Lannister army, there's a Hightower army. The Hightower army, we do again get a mention of Prince Diran. He will definitely be making an appearance. He's got a dragon down there. This is another member of Team Green. He is quite young. He's the youngest of Alicent's children, but he has got a dragon to Sarion. So we get a mention of them, but that'll take them a while to get there because they're still a long way away. So we get this plan come up once more that, if you remember, Aemond and Criston Cole were kind of talking it through way back in episode 1. Now they're in charge, and so they can get to push their own agenda. And the basic plan is Criston Cole's going to head out. He's going to go with his army. He'll start taking some of these smaller castles, Rosby, Stokeworth, the castles just north of King's Landing, and then he's going to head up towards Harrenhal. Harrenhal is strategically important, right at the heart of the Riverlands, near the crossroads. You will remember the inn at the crossroads from Game of Thrones. Really important. It's the crossroads at the middle of the road. This is, you get the King's Road going north and south, and you get the road heading east off into the Vale, west through the Riverlands over towards the Westlands. So it's a really important place, and it's the biggest castle in the land. So that's why people want to take that. Aegon wants to follow with his dragon, but kind of gets overruled. There's a power play going on here, and he sort of gets persuaded by this logic, first of all, by the logic that if Team Green bring dragons, then Team Black will have to bring dragons, and that's just escalating things to another level. So if we don't, there's a fair chance that they might just bring a land army, and let's see, we can try and minimize casualties this way. That sort of works, but we get this jump cut a little bit later to him trying on the armor of Aegon the Conqueror, which is huge news. Aegon, we're told, had Valyrian steel armor. Now, this is massive for anyone who's sort of like into the deeper lore of this. They will know quite how big this is. That Valyrian steel is a lost technology, and it is better than any, like exponentially better than anything else in terms of sort of metalwork and armory and stuff like this that is available at the time. There are a couple of hundred known blades in Westeros at the time, Valyrian steel. We saw how sharp it was. Daemon carries one of them, for example, Dark Sister. Season 1, chops somebody's head in half. That's how effective they are. We don't know of any Valyrian steel armor anywhere in Westeros at this time. There is a mention, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but yes, there is a mention in a pre-release chapter for the Winds of Winter of one, but here now we know nothing about this. This is hugely expensive and pretty much unique. Incredibly powerful armor. But Larys manages to persuade him not to, by sort of whispering in his ear, rumours are that when you're gone, then your mother's going to take control. And he doesn't like that, Aegon. So on his way out, Aegon appoints Larys to the Green Council. Well done, Larys, for making himself useful to the right people and going up another rung on the ladder. We've got some questions about Larys and his intentions later, so we will cover that. But Aegon also then is sort of a throwaway scene in a way, but Aegon also, he heads down, gets drunk with his mates, and sees Aemond back again with his lowborn lover. And basically Aegon mocks him. the dynamic between those two is going to be increasingly important, I'm sure, as the show goes on. So, Christian Cole heads out. On his way out, we get a new character coming in, Gawain Hightower. This is Alison's brother. He's clearly very annoyed that Otto has been deposed as Hand of the King. He's thinks that he can blame Christian Cole for this, but he also comes across as being a little bit arrogant and not taking the dragon threat all that seriously. He's been away from all of this. It's sort of understandable, but still, he doesn't come across as a particularly sympathetic character at this stage. We get that scene where he's out in the middle of a field, and Baylor, who in previous episode we discovered had been tasked with keeping an eye on troop movements in and around King's Landing, she spots them, she chases them. She can't see where the army is, but she does mark Christian Cole. Okay, so that's broadly the sort of the Team Green response. There's another couple of things I'm going to pick up on in just one moment. Because Harrenhal, we get introduced to Harrenhal through the eyes of Damon. Now, this is... as I say, this is an astonishing castle. It's the largest castle that we have in all of Westeros, and it is magical. We saw it a little bit in Game of Thrones, but that didn't really do it justice. Some of the set here we get in the kind of the inside the episode mini videos that they produce over on HBO. We get a lot more information from this. I loved the set design where you have the weirwood tree, which is right at the water's edge, and seemingly all the branches are all arcing out over the sea towards the Isle of Faces, which is, as far as we're concerned, the hub of the weirwood network. And what we learned from the inside the episode kind of thing was that if you actually look it's quite dark in Harrenhal, but if you look at the walls, you can see the roots of that weirwood tree have started spreading all the way through the castle, breaking through the walls, coming up through the floor, as if the weirwoods are trying to retake the castle. So we already knew that Harrenhal was quite a cursed place, allegedly, possibly quite a magical place, but this adds on a whole extra layer to what we previously knew. Anyway, Damon arrives, and it's pretty, I wouldn't say deserted, because you still get a few people there, but it's a massive castle with not many defenders. He comes across Sir Simon Strong. Now, Sir Simon Strong is Castellan there. He's been left in charge. Technically, this is now Larys Strong's castle. But he's not there. He's not been there for a long time. And Simon Strong doesn't put up a fight. In fact, he almost welcomes Damon. Now, that's the first thing we've got going on, and Damon's there. He's obviously, his plan is he's going to take the castle, he's going to gather an army, then he's going to go down and take King's Landing. But we start to get these kind of weird dream sequences. He sees young Rhaenyra rather gruesomely trying to stitch the head back onto baby Jaehaerys, who was basically killed on Damon's order. This is a dream. This is not reality. And this appears to be Damon's conscience talking to him in a way. But there's another layer, because almost with a click of your fingers, he appears in front of the weirwood tree. What happened? How did I get here? And then this mysterious figure of Alice Rivers just sort of looks at him and says, "You're going to die here." All very spooky dooky. Alice Rivers, I will be doing a video on at some point, but she is probably, definitely the most obviously magical person in the whole of the Dance of the Dragons. So she's going to be here at Harrenhal throughout, and Harrenhal is going to become sort of like this third hub as we go through not just this season, but probably into next season as well, this kind of third hub to the narrative. So far, it's been what's happening in King's Landing, what's happening in Dragonstone, and now we have this third place, Harrenhal. So they built a massive set for it, so we'll be seeing these three forming kind of a triangle of what's going on. A lot of the action is going to be happening in and around that triangle. Okay, one thing I did also mention in my breakdown video was it feels like a small thing, but it also is quite important, is how Daemon wanted to be addressed. And he corrects Sir Simon Strong and says, "Your Grace." He's not my lord, he's Your Grace. Now, why is this important? Your Grace is how you would address a king or queen, not necessarily just them. It can be a close member of the royal family. So this isn't necessarily him saying, actually, treat me like a king, but a lot of the language usage he then goes on to say, he talks about, well, let's see what people think with the presence of the crown in the Riverlands. He's the one in the Riverlands. Is he saying he's the crown? Then he says, and then I'm going to. He's asked what's the plan next. He said, now then go down and claim King's Landing. And you can see in Sir Simon Strong's eyes, he's like going, do you mean for yourself? He's far too much of a diplomat to actually ask this. And we're not being invited to think that this is definitely what Daemon's doing, but we are being invited to think, is this what's going on in the back of his head? Is this a thought that he's got that maybe Rhaenyra, previous episode, had already accused him of this, of thinking that he would make a better king, he would make a better ruler than her. And so again, this thought is going on. Is he thinking that? In the book, that's not really a line that they go down, but we'll have to wait and see, I think, for the next few episodes to see the extent to which they're just playing with this idea, or they're actually going to turn this into an extra plot point. Okay, so in Dragonstone, we find that again, the Black Council is not really doing much at this point. Rhaenyra is understandably reluctant to go straight to all-out war. She probably has an advantage in the numbers of dragons, although with Daemon gone, that does make it a little bit more touch and go, because Daemon on Caraxes was hugely powerful, and without him, yes, there's her, and yes, there's Melis, and then a few more inexperienced dragons and dragon riders, but up against Vhagar and possibly Sunfire as well, it's not overwhelming superiority. So Daemon going also keeps the balance there, the kind of the dragon balance going. So she, however, does start reacting first of all to the deaths of Eric and Arik, or the assassination attempt on her, in an understandable way, which is she thinks, okay, they got in once, they could get in again. At the moment, we're all here on this one small island. It must be better to kind of split people up a bit. So she sends some of her family off elsewhere. Baby Joffrey, who is now, after Jaehaerys, the next in line to the throne. And then also, I say Baby Joffrey, he's young now. I don't know exactly what age he's supposed to be on the show, but he's still a boy. And then Aegon and Viserys, the two children that she has with Daemon, who are quite young. She sends them along with Rhaena and 4 dragon eggs, as well as 2 hatchling dragons. She sends 4 dragon eggs. Now, I did a video on this a couple of days ago. We can dig into this if you want, but what we're told on the show is that 3 of those dragon eggs will become the 3 that are Dany's in Game of Thrones 170 years later or whatever. Now, that's probably not what happened in the books. If you want the full detail of that, as I say, I did a video on it. But basically, as far as we can tell in the books, then there's Alyssa Farman, decades before this, stole 3 dragon eggs from Dragonstone and sold them to the Sea Lord of Bravos. And as far as we can tell in the books, that is still how those dragon eggs got over there. So this is one of those things where it's 2 cannons. George R. R. Martin has been very clear on this, is that we might prefer one or we might prefer the other, but in his mind he's very clear sometimes there will be differences between the book and the show, and let's not get too hung up on them. It's basically what his messaging is. You might prefer the book one, fine. I personally prefer the book version, but this is what is happening on the show. So she sends them off. Just as an aside, something for future here, and I don't know when they will show these guys getting to the Vale. We have seen Lady Jane Arryn in some pre-season publicity, so we do know that we will get to see her. She agreed a deal with Jace that she would join the war in exchange for a dragon to defend the Vale of Arryn, which seems like a reasonable request. They had quite a few dragons there. Rhaenyra has basically turned around and gone, okay, so I'm not going to send you a fully grown dragon. I will send you 3 children, 1 teenager without a dragon, 4 dragon eggs, and 2 dragon hatchlings. Will that do? So we'll have to wait and see. This is clearly not what Jane Arryn had in mind. In her mind, clearly will have been, this is a dragon to scare off anyone trying to attack me. And she's basically just been sent a whole load of people, which, if anything, makes the Vale more of a target for the Team Green without much extra defense. So that's probably parked until late the second half of the season sometime, but it will be an interesting conversation when we get to there. Okay, but then the main part of, I've got a sneeze coming, so hang on. Pardon me. Obviously, the main sort of big ending point for this episode was Rhaenyra deciding to go to talk to Alicent. Now, this was at the prompting or planting of the seed by Rhaenys when the 2 of them were standing over the graves of Eric and Arik. And basically Rhaenys said, probably you and Alicent are now the only 2 people on either side who have both the desire and the ability to stop this from going to all-out war, because in a moment this is going to go to all-out war. We've already seen the Brackens and the Blackwoods. We've heard that there's an army on the march. The Team Green have got an army on the march. We will have to respond, but there's still a possibility of a chance, just a smidge, just a hint of a chance that we could get some peace from this. So Rhaenyra kind of takes her up on this idea, reads the letter that Alicent had sent her, gets some intelligence from Messalina, who is now appointed to her council, basically, and heads over there. And she goes just with one Stefan Darklin, just one member of her Kingsguard. She meets Alicent, and it's probably fair to say that there wasn't really peace talks, but they did have, for character-wise, a really good and interesting conversation. Because the main thing which came out from there was the fact that Alicent could tell Rhaenyra the fact that Viserys changed his mind on his deathbed about who should be inheriting. And Rhaenyra could tell Alicent, but you're mistaken about that because of the Song of Ice and Fire. And Alicent now is going to be right. So I got that wrong. What she says is it's too late. So basically, she just waves away the idea that there could be any peace. Rhaenys assumed that Alicent still had enough power in King's Landing to stop this war. Alicent basically has concluded that she hasn't. So peace is now off the table, and that's the biggest plot point from there, is that now Rhaenyra, and we've had from the trailer, clearly she seems to be in a very different mood in terms of, what have I unleashed, or words to that effect. So she's now thinking about war, and so war will be joined in this next episode, which is called, incidentally, in case you missed it, that we've got the episode title, A Dance of Dragons. So war is happening as of this episode 4. In terms of Alicent, what is this going to do to her? She is now going to know that her part, and she wasn't the only person who was responsible for this civil war by a long shot, but her part was based on a complete misunderstanding on that she pushed for something that she shouldn't have done. If you remember, she was actually very much, after that lovely last meal they all had with Viserys, she was there, oh, you'll be a wonderful Queen, Rhaenyra, and this changed her mind, and now she's going to have to live with that. So this is more of a character development thing for her rather than a plot point. It may become a plot point later. We shall have to wait and see. Was there anything else that I wanted to say quickly about that episode? Think that there was just a couple of things. One thing to point out, Helena forgave Alicent. I've seen some people, and I would agree this is definitely a possibility, that Helena is actually forgiving Alicent for something she's not yet done. But again, as a character, Helena doesn't know that, and so she is just taking this as forgiveness for herself, which she very much needs. And I think the other thing, two more things, were Ulf White. Now, he's the third of the dragon seeds that we've now met. He gets quite a bit more in this episode. He had quite a bit more time for us to get to know his character, and he seems the life and soul of the party. Everyone seems to love spending time with him, and he's there, always seems to be there with the tall stories, and he basically tells everyone that he is the bastard son of Balon the Brave Targaryen. And that means that is Viserys and Daemon's father. So that means that he is claiming to be the half-brother of Daemon Targaryen and the half-uncle of Rhaenyra. So he is, although he's there in King's Landing, he is very much, from what he said, he's very much Team Black. So this does give us a reason how or why he might get over to Dragonstone, which we know that he will have to, added to which why he might try to bond with the dragon if he does genuinely believe that he is part Targaryen. So we've got the start of his story going on there. And the other thing to note was a sort of a throwaway line about Sea Smoke. Sea Smoke the dragon, we've mentioned this a few times. This is a big lurking lore issue that they will have to address at some point, is that Sea Smoke the dragon, we know from the books, will have a new rider, Adam Velaryon. He's not Velaryon yet, Adam of Hull. He will bond with Sea Smoke, and that's fine in the books because the previous rider, Laenor, is very much dead in the books. But here on the show, they kept Laenor alive. They gave him, a happy-ish ending, heading over to Essos to start a new life. Now, it's up in the air. We were all wondering, how are they going to deal with this? Are they going to have Laenor die off screen? Are they going to create a new bit of dragon lore that a dragon can bond, a dragon can separate, its bond can be separated if it gets abandoned by its rider? It can get a new rider. That will be completely new dragon lore if that were true. Are they just going to sort of wave their hands and hope nobody notices? We don't know. But we do get a kind of a throwaway line in this last episode where Rhaenyra says, yeah, he's been kind of restless of late. And Messalina says, maybe he's lonely, which I think is starting to hint at how they might be handling it. And at the very least, hint at the fact that they're not just going to do hand waves and just hope that we don't notice it. They are going to address this issue. Brennan Mitra just saying in the chat for an update from Thursday, I gave you permission to riot if the showrunners decide to cancel Adam Valarion going to the Isle of Faces. Yeah, I mean, a sort of a calm and gentle riot, I think. No, you're not storming the dragon pit, but yes, definitely, we can wave homemade banners and things, something along those lines. Right, let me just have a look through the chat here. Erin Sanek saying maybe he's lonely. The sudden look of shock Rhaenyra gave Messalina after she said that. She was worried. She probably hadn't thought of Laenor in years. Now she's wondering what happened to him. Lady Sophia Valarion saying, I didn't enjoy watching the scene with Ulf and his drinking buddies. It felt like I was watching a different show. I'll wait and see. I think that was an introduction to the character so that we know what to expect from him as much as anything else. And Akira Joker Kurusu saying there's a point made that Helena doesn't really think she has a right to grieve for her children vis-a-vis the small folk. Ergo, she doesn't forgive Alicent for being with Cole. Yeah, that's quite interesting sort of logical extension point, unless she's gone through a bit of thinking since then. Okay, so that's largely caught up in the chat. I will just say once more, this is a charity stream in aid of International Rescue, which is an excellent charity, just helping out those people who need it the most in this world. So if you're enjoying the stream, wish to show your appreciation in some way, that is the way to do it. Okay, so I will now go over to some questions from my patrons. Rassler saying, good day, Robert. Hope you and Dan the dog are well. We are. Thank you very much. With the show aging down Stormcloud, it seems he will no longer be able to save Aegon. How will the show handle it? Is it possible they will alter Jace's death by having him save his brother but dying in the attempt? Okay, so this is... I gave you the spoiler warning earlier. This is what happens in the book. And whether this happens this season or not, we don't know. It should by timeline, but it's possible. It's one of those things that they might shift into next season. So they've already changed this slightly, but in the book, then we had Rhaenyra deciding to, or Jace, I think it was actually deciding to send off Viserys and Aegon, the two youngest members of the family, off over to Essos. Now, it's slightly different on the show because in the show they're first going up to the Vale, which, as I say, is slightly pushing everything back by a little bit, which adds to this idea that maybe we're not going to get that storyline until next season, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, what happens there is that ship gets intercepted along the way by the Triarchy, and Viserys gets captured, and Aegon manages to escape. He manages to escape on his dragon, Stormcloud. Stormcloud is a very young dragon. This is the first time Aegon has flown on it, but somehow, and Aegon is very young, but somehow manages to get back to Dragonstone to alert people to what had happened. This leads to the Battle of the Gullet. So, do we think that what they've done with Stormcloud now has prevented this from happening? Personally, no. We haven't seen Stormcloud yet. We're told it's a hatchling. Now, that means a small dragon. How small, we don't know. But also, Aegon is quite small. The fact that Stormcloud hasn't been ridden yet matches up. The fact that they're not going there straight away also kind of matches up with the idea that maybe Stormcloud can age up a little bit. So I don't think this changes anything personally, but it's it's possible that they might change that storyline a little bit because of the fact that they're going. Definitely, these characters are going from, I mean, presumably Goldtown, over in the Vale, rather than heading off from Dragonstone. So the storyline will have to shift a little bit, but I think I see no reason that this would change Jace's fate in any way. Um, AD saying, I thought the Your Grace issue was done badly. It makes perfect sense for Damon to be called Your Grace. Why would any commoner ever assume otherwise? This was so Simon Strong wasn't a commoner. Um, uh, so the fact, I think, what they're trying to show us um, was not that he is claiming to be something that he's not allowed. So Simon Strong is not like, okay, no, I didn't. I'm really sorry. I'm going to bend down and start bowing to you as you're clearly claiming to be king. He didn't do that. I felt the point of that was more the speed at which Damon immediately cut him off and said, this is how you address me, was that he's claiming at the very least to be in the very inner circle of Rhaenyra. So there's no hint that there might be a downgrade here. He is in his mind suggesting at the very least, I think, some sort of co-rule. Let's go to DickCrabb'sSquire saying, good evening, and to you. Episode 3 with Alicent and Rhaenyra reminded me very much like Europe in August of 1914. Very few truly wanted war, and yet were too afraid or proud to stop the mobilization. Yeah, for those who aren't up with early 20th century history, before the start of the First World War, many people have written many long books about this, so historians forgive me for oversimplifying, but the war started not by the fact that a particular empire decided it wished to go and attack everybody else, but through the fact that there was just this whole series of interconnected alliances, which meant that there was just this chain of events that went through, and before anyone could really stop it, everyone was at war with everyone else. As I say, huge oversimplification, and the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the spark that set all of that off. So I think I can entirely understand the feel here. You've got these two blocks, and certainly the way that they've set up the show is of a kind of a tragedy in the almost classical sense of once you've set the characters in place and the starting events here, it's like pushing some dominoes. The whole thing just carries on. There's nothing you can do to stop this. It is that once you are down that road, it doesn't actually matter if lots of people don't want this thing to happen. It's going to happen regardless. And that, I think, is the kind of feel that they're going to go with this. To emphasize what they've had as the key relationship in this whole TV show, which is Alicent and Rhaenyra, they have made those two the characters who are most sympathetic to the idea of let's not have a war. And I did kind of like it. It does explain why Team Black were quite slow in doing things, which they were in the book, it has to be said. And the general explanation is that, Rhaenyra was just mad with grief, so not a lot happened, which doesn't really sit right, because that's the kind of thing that the Maesters do, as a kind of like that the woman over there, she wasn't really good enough. That's the way that George R. R. Martin writes the Maester's writing, is along those lines. So it feels okay, certainly that side. The way that they've added to Alicent with her having regrets does also seem to chime in with the fact that she does, in the book, she does later come up with a peace plan. So we certainly know that later on in the story, she should be somebody who's thinking, well, can we just stop this? And so again, I've got no problem with them kind of bringing that forward a little bit. This is, we have to keep on reminding ourselves, Fire and Blood might be like a 700-page tome, but we're only talking about like 100 or so pages here, which is going to be adapted into well, we'll have to wait and see, but let's say 40 hours of television. So they do have to expand out quite a lot. Lonely Light, do you think they will keep Alice Rivers alive until Cregan arrives? Yes, she should stay alive through past the end of this season. Alice Rivers is one of the characters who, in the book, her storyline is one of those loose threads that, quite rightly, in a history book where they just sort of drew a line at the end of this particular period of year 136 or whatever it was, that ends at Fire and Blood Part 1. Of course, there will be a few threads, and hers is one of those threads that is deliberately left hanging. So she should very much still be alive through this. Ranabim Mitra saying, how exactly do you see Ulf the White getting Silverwing? Let me know your thoughts on my possible choice of execution of events below. I feel that when Melies gets paraded across King's Landing, a mass exodus occurs, taking Ulf from King's Landing to Dragonstone. There, when the sowing of the dragon seeds takes place, a very hesitant and scared Ulf gets egged on by his compatriots to try and get his grandmother's dragon. Come on, Ulf, you said you were Balon's bastard, right? Prove it. In a surprising turn of events, instead of getting burned alive, he actually bonds with Silverwing. So, thank you very much. I've seen some people have been doing some donating. Thank you. I hugely appreciate that. I haven't been able to sort of check every name as they're going through, but I have seen and I appreciate it. I really like this idea. As I said, we already have a reason potentially for him to be on Dragonstone because he's already declared his affinity with Team Black rather than Team Green. We have seen from the preseason trailers what look like scenes of panic, or scenes of, if not rioting, then certainly the small folk of King's Landing being very scared of something. Now, there should, within the book, when the head of Melies the dragon gets hauled into the streets of King's Landing, it's intended by Team Green to be the look, we're winning the war kind of moment. In reality, it makes the people of King's Landing panic because what they know is that if you've taken down one of the other side's dragons, they're going to start releasing their dragons. And you're just in that big castle over there. The dragons are going to come here and start burning things. The people will try and get out. The people will try to evacuate King's Landing. In the book, then they lock the gates, don't let them out. This is not popular. So Ulf the White may well manage to escape while some people are escaping, are panicking about this. He may well make his way over to Dragonstone. I do like this idea. He clearly is quite boastful, very open about his parentage, his claimed parentage, even with people in that scene we saw with people that he'd never met before. All they had to do was buy him a beer, and then he was like telling them, and it was like, shh, don't say anything. He's told loads of people this clearly, so he's not going to be any more quiet about this if he goes to Dragonstone. And if the call goes out, anyone here with Targaryen heritage, then he has to be there at the front of the queue. So all of this makes sense. And yes, him trying to claim a dragon and then claiming it, I think will be fascinating if he looks surprised by this. Because if he genuinely thinks that he's Balon the Brave's son, then he probably thinks that he should be able to claim a dragon. If he actually doesn't think that, then maybe he will be a little bit more concerned as he's approaching the dragon, and a little bit more relieved when he claims it. Lonely Light just asking about Nettles. I have no update on Nettles. Situation's the same as it has been for a while, is that what we know a few facts here. Fact number one, there has been no confirmed anything about Nettles this season. We haven't had a character announcement, actor announcement. We haven't seen any shots of somebody who's obviously Nettles. We've seen some shots of what are clearly the dragon seeds, and there's no Nettles there. So Nettles does appear to be absent from the pre-show advertising. Ryan Condler has been noticeably, in a number of interviews, he's been noticeably reticent on the issue of Nettles. But we also know that there should be a gap between the 3 initial dragon seeds getting their dragons and her getting her dragon. So just because we've seen 3 dragon seeds and not her does not mean that she is not going to turn up. Now, Ryan Condler being evasive also doesn't necessarily mean that she's been wiped out of the script. It could mean that she's not in this season and he doesn't want to talk about her because she's not in this season. It could mean that she is going to appear in the last episode and he wants it to be a big surprise for those people who don't know about what's going on. There are a number of different reasons. So I'm still on the fence on this one. I've got no inside knowledge. If I had inside knowledge, I wouldn't be sharing it anyway, because we don't do that kind of spoiler on this channel. But as it stands, I'm not concerned yet. But we also haven't had anything to suggest that she is about to appear. Brian Shaddock saying Nettles is probably split among a few characters. That might even be how the hulls came sea smoke. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have speculated that. Just Top Shelf Fandom, thank you very much. Good to see you, by the way. Thank you for your donation. A lot of people have speculated that her character might be split up. So maybe Baylor is going to be taking on role of this kind of like 4th dragon seed because she's been aged up and she's got a dragon. And some people have said, well, maybe it's going to be Rhaena. There's 4 dragon eggs going to the Vale. Maybe one of those she hatches should hatch because that's going to be morning, but maybe they just sort of bring morning forward. So there's a lot of different people saying, oh, well, maybe they're just going to merge a few different characters. I understand where that's come from. That's certainly something they did a lot in Game of Thrones, the TV show, but I'm withholding judgment on this one. I know it's a lot more fun to just come out and say definitely, oh, this is definitely happening or not happening. We simply do not know, and there is no reason why we should know, because they can carry on at the speed they're going, and her not appearing this season, and it would be absolutely fine with the timing of, as far as we can tell so far, the timing of the show. Let's go to Rassler. In the books, Aemond slaughters the remaining strong family members despite Larys being a green ally. And it's implied he does it out of hatred for Luke and Jace. Is the show setting up the real reason for it simply because the Strongs will be loyal to Team Black members and refuse to bend the knee to Aegon or Aemond, and it wasn't done out of anger or hatred for the strong bastards? Well, I went back to check what it says in Fire and Blood. So for those who don't know this bit of the story, again, spoilers, what happens in the book. So Daemon is obviously there at Harrenhal, and Aemond starts getting obsessed with taking on Daemon and Daemon is the real threat and all the rest of it. And so he and Criston Cole set out again. We've already seen Criston Cole set out. He's going to come back, and then they'll set out again, this time to take Harrenhal. And Aemon's going to go with Vhagar. And when they arrive, they find that Damon and his army are not there. They've gone. And Aemond takes this as a victory. He thinks, that's it, they've run away from me. They're scared of me. And this is what I've got here. This is what it says in Fire and Blood. Um, uh, He, Aemond, reached Harrenhal a day after Cole, and that night celebrated a great victory. Damon and his river scum had fled rather than face his wrath, Aemond proclaimed. Small wonder, then, that when word of the fall of King's Landing reached him, the prince felt thrice the fool. His fury was fearsome to behold, because what had happened is that Damon hadn't run away from Aemond. Of course, he hadn't run away from Aemond. He'd realised that what had happened was that Criston Cole had marched out of King's Landing with his army, and Aemond had come out on the back of Vhagar. So who was defending King's Landing? Well, no one really. There's not much of an army left. Damon still had lots of friends in the Gold Cloaks. And what about the dragons? Well, by this point, Sunfire is out of action, and by this point, Helena is not going to be flying Dreamfire at any point soon. So open target. So Aemond is angry with himself as much as anything else over the fact that he has, in his mind, been duped by this. So we sort of read on. Simon Strong is the first person he takes it out on, and then Simon Strong protests, and then says, "Hey, my own great nephew is Larys Strong. He's on Team Green." But then we're told these denials only inflamed Aemond's suspicions. The clubfoot was a traitor as well, he decided. How else would Daemon and Rhaenyra have known when King's Landing was most vulnerable? So actually, what we have here is Aemond. He does kill all of House Strong. Larys is the only member of House Strong who's left. He kills all of House Strong, including the nice Sir Simon Strong, out of anger anger over being duped, and B, he says that they must have the Strongs. They must have been behind telling Daemon what was going on. So that's the kind of the logic. Yes, the meta story here is very much the Aemond has always kind of hated the Strong boys, but really this is more about him and his own personal anger about what's going on. I don't think that there's a reason to kind of doubt that overall narrative will be any different. In fact, I could just imagine it right now. Whenever they get to this point in the story, I'm sure we all can just kind of picture. You get Aemond arriving in Harrenhal, they're declaring victory, and then we get this jump cut to King's Landing falling, and a good director would be able to do that so well, of like Aemond thinking that he's won, but in fact he's been shown to be a bit of an idiot, abandoning King's Landing. Let's go to a question from Commander Ray. I was thinking about Sea Smoke and last episode, how he's gotten lonely. It's been several years since his rider left him, and only now he senses a possible new rider. And only now he senses a possible new rider does he begin acting up. I think a dragon bond can be broken like that if, or any bond or relationship of distance or time, and that Sea Smoke getting claimed will show further evidence of dragons being their own masters, and that control over them is an illusion, and perhaps setting some foreshadowing for a dragon breaking free of their rider entirely and doing something terrible. Okay, so I find this interesting. We talked a little bit about Sea Smoke and the fact that they do have to address this quite big law issue. I think, and I can't remember whose question it was a little bit earlier. I think this idea that Rhaenyra noticing that Sea Smoke is getting restless, the suggestion that Sea Smoke might be lonely. When she sees somebody actually bonding with Sea Smoke, I think that this will make her think that Lenore must have died. I think that's where they're going to go. But undeniably, we have, and so that's what she thinks, not necessarily what has actually happened. I think that that is going to be what she thinks. But undeniably, one of the themes that we had in season 1 of House of the Dragon, one of the big themes, was this: dragons are not in control of and under the control of humans. Viserys said that really, really early on. He says, this is a great myth. This is a lie that we control dragons. And that seemed, the implication was, this came from his own personal experience in some way. And then we saw what happened right at the end of the Battle of Shipbreaker Bay. We saw it as not just Vhagar disobeying Aemond, but also Arax was disobeying Luke. So both dragons in that case were doing their own thing. They were ignoring instructions. So this is kind of adding to this idea that there are drops of this in A Song of Ice and Fire, that you don't have the bond may perhaps be as not as strong a thing as people think. Humans don't have as strong control over dragons as they might think that they do, which is kind of adding to this idea that we're told pure Valyrian blood is what is needed, which may well be true. There's lots of kind of evidence you can dig into this if you go deep. There's some fantastic videos out there on this. The link between Targaryens, dragon riders, and dragons it's not just like a kind of a familial thing. It's actually part of their bloodline. There seems to have been, in modern parlance, perhaps even some kind of gene splicing thing that goes on that makes them, when they say blood of the dragon, it's literally there's some kind of blood of the dragon in them in some way. But, and this is the interesting bit, the further down the Targaryen line you go, actually, the less of this pure Targaryen Valyrian bloodline is there, because they marry other people. And as much as, yes, they're marrying each other all the time, and they are marrying each other a huge amount of the time, other families do come in here. So by the time we get all the way down to Daenerys, she is at most, I've not done the whole maths, but just going back 3 or 4 generations, she is at most 1/8 Targaryen. So you do have to say that this kind of dilution of the Targaryen Valyrian dragon bonding genetics, at some point it has to have an impact. Let's go to Lady Pushkin's asking, sorry, do I think a dragon could be warged? You know what? If I had a pen or something, I would write that down. I get asked this so many times. I'm going to make a video on that one. I'm not going to try and answer this one here. Can dragons be warged? Is something I think a lot of people want the answer to, and I'm going to do a good deep dive into that one, and I shall give you my my answer there. Let's go to a question from Paul Al-Gaib. I am excited. Hi, Robert. I'm excited for the next episode, though I wish it aired a few hours earlier for European time zones. Well, yes, I will happily second that. My question is about Vagon, the son of Jaehaerys I. Do you think he could have become a maester had he been a dragon rider? And do you think we might see him later in the show, maybe when we see Diran and Tessarion? Okay, so there's this is one of those Targaryen characters that kind of disappears from history. We get this a reasonable amount actually in Fire and Blood, a lot more later on in the Targaryen timeline, but in Fire and Blood we do get this with a few different Targaryen characters who they're not in the main Targaryen family. They go off and do other things, and then they kind of disappear from the pages of history. so we don't really know huge amounts about them. But this is a character who theoretically could be alive during the Dance of the Dragons. So this is Vagon, who is the seventh born child of old King Charis. Now, so old King Charis is, if you remember, he was the king we saw right at the beginning of House of the Dragon season 1, where he had ran out of heirs, and then he had to have the Great Council to decide who should be inheriting after him, and it went to Viserys. So the seventh born son, because he started out, Jaehaerys and Alicent started out with lots of children, 13 children they had in total, which is why this was such a surprise that there was a succession crisis at the end of his reign, because surely it must be pretty obvious. But the seventh born son, this guy called Vagon, he doesn't get written up particularly sympathetically in Fire and Blood, it has to be said. But he's clearly very bookish. This is a word which is used of him. He loved learning, he loved reading and writing, and he wasn't particularly sociable. And he didn't really seem to get on with anyone. He didn't seem to want to marry anyone. And eventually, Jaehaerys seems to have sort of thrown up his hands and sort of given up and sort of spoken to his Grand Maester and said, "Do you reckon this guy could go and be a maester? Is that a thing that could happen?" Because he didn't have a dragon, he wasn't married, and so might as well just send him down there. Maybe he would be happy. And the Grand Maester said, "Well, I think he'd actually be quite a good archmaester, not somebody sort of going out and advising the kings and lords and things like that, but just somebody doing the research and research and teaching down in the Citadel." So off trots Vagon. Apparently, the closest they saw to a smile was when he got told that he could be a maester. He heads off down to Old Town, only seen from one more time. After that, we're told that he did write back to his parents kind of dutifully every now and then, but there was no particular warmth. He appears again when, just before the Great Council, Jaehaerys kind of calls him back up and they have a conversation. We're not told what was in this conversation. Some people are wondering whether or not Jaehaerys was saying, "Hey, did you want to be king? Because I kind of run out of children now." Maybe, maybe not. But we do know that what happened was that Vagon suggested the Great Council. And that is what happened, is that we then had this Great Council, all the lords of the land voted and decided on Viserys, at which point Vagon disappears back down to Old Town. Cue got lots of conspiracy theories about how this was all a maester plot in the Great Council of 101. I've got a whole other rabbit hole on that one. But he then disappears off. We don't hear from him. We don't know what happens. We do know that by the time of the Dance of the Dragons, he would be 66 years old. Now, that means that he could still be alive. But my guess is probably not. We are told that when he was seen again during that period, just when he was probably 40-ish, something along those lines, when he came back up to King's Landing briefly, we were told that he was frail, even at 40. And this does happen to some Targaryens, particularly the ones that get described as being bookish. If you go and have a look at the ones who are described as bookish and then frail at quite an early age, this does happen. So our best guess is that he probably died at some point during Viserys' reign. He certainly isn't mentioned again in Fire and Blood during the Dance of the Dragons as being, well, maybe here's somebody who can come in and intervene and help out or offer a wise word to the Targaryens. So my guess is no. I think that he's gone. If we did see him again, then yes, I think you're right. Down in Old Town is where we would find him. Fabricio Mfana, I apologize for probably completely mispronouncing your name, saying, if Vagon happens to be alive, would it be interesting if Vagon came back much later in the story and spearheaded the Maester's attempts to kill the dragons by poisoning the eggs? That would be interesting. I think it's still open whether we get that far in the story. My best guess still, they've not announced this at all, but my best guess still is that they're going to go up to the Hour of the Wolf and then draw the line there and then sort of jump all the way back, and the next thing we get is Aegon's conquest. That's my best guess. They've been making quite a few references to Aegon. We've had the armor, we've had the crown, we've had the new title sequence with Aegon's invasion. So we've had a lot of references to Aegon here, which tends to be suggestive of the fact that that's the next thing. We've not really had much that is teeing up the idea of what might happen in the Regency. So probably not, but yeah, it's a nice idea. Callie Summers, interesting idea, saying just like dragons need to be able to spread their wings to grow healthily, the Targaryens that spend all day with books wither too. Oh yeah, it's quite an interesting idea. I like that. Chloe Lyon, thank you very much for the kind words in the chat as well. Let's go to a question from Gina Z. Hi, Robert. You posted a Spy Wars video last year about the Larys versus Messalina dynamic on House of the Dragon. Do you have any thoughts on how the rivalry is unfolding in season 2 now that we're almost to the halfway mark? And what are your predictions for the rest of the season? As always, thank you for your excellent coverage. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I did. I think I produced that just after the end of season 1 of House of the Dragon. And my thinking there was that we had two kind of burgeoning spy networks. We had Larys and his spy network, and we had Messalina and her spy network. And my thinking was that Larys had just destroyed Messalina's home base, but then Messalina will take this back out on the Team Green. Now, it's not worked out quite like that in season 2, it has to be said. So she left King's Landing and she's now here working for Rhaenyra. So she's earning her pay basically for Rhaenyra. She's told her how that she can get herself into King's Landing. She had previously told Daemon about Blood and Cheese. So she's set up here as the person in Team Black who knows how to get in to King's Landing and knows the ins and outs of what's going on in King's Landing. So I think that is where this is going to be. She is keen to be getting some kind of revenge, it has to be said, but also here to support the small folk. That I think is going to be another thing. So I think in season 2, her role is probably going to be constrained to, I don't know whether they're going to try and smuggle another person into King's Landing. They've done that twice in 3 episodes now, so probably not. If we get as far as, and I hope we do, if we get as far as the taking of King's Landing, somebody will need to be there to be providing the intelligence. Now, we've already had, I gave you the quote a little bit earlier from when Aemond, who's gone all the way off to Harrenhal, suddenly discovers what's happened. He thinks somebody must have said, somebody must have given out this information about what's going on. Perhaps that person is Messalina. Perhaps it's Larys Strong. We've got this long-standing little asterisk next to Larys Strong about what are his true motivations, and this little asterisk next to that throwaway line in Fire and Blood where we say Daemon had allies or an ally in the Green Council. Who's that? George R. R. Martin doesn't pick up on that. He doesn't tell us that. I think probably the main person who's going to be doing the intelligence, how do we actually get people into and take King's Landing, is going to be Messalina. And after that, we're going to get her role, yes, as being this kind of spy mistress / informer, but also I think that we're going to get increasingly playing up her role with the small folk. how I originally, to bring this back to the question and my video from ages ago, how I originally conceived the spy war happening, I think it's probably not going to happen. But that does not mean that the two of those spy type people are not going to be coming into conflict. Let's go to let's have a quick look in the chat. See, we've got a few questions here. That Elf Torren saying, it seems possible to me as well that the more times a dragon is claimed, the more difficult they find it to bond with a new rider. Thoughts? Well, in the Dragon Seed section of the book, the thinking was that it was easier for somebody to bond with a dragon who had previously had a rider than bond with a dragon that had not previously had a rider. That was the feeling that was there, which was sort of backed up by the fact that the first 3 dragons that were claimed were all dragons that had previously had riders. Now, it's also true that the older the dragon gets, and therefore the more riders a dragon has had, then the more independent they seem to be. We see that with Vhagar here. We saw that Vhagar, yes, Vhagar could be tamed, but could be claimed by Aemond. But it's very clear that Aemond hasn't got 100% control over Vhagar. And Balerion, the even older dragon, who's dead by this point in the story, but we know a huge amount about, that was Aegon the Conqueror's dragon, and then after Aegon, it was Maegor's dragon. Then, actually, the last rider was Viserys, but only for like less than a year. And that was the dragon that we know that young Aeria Targaryen, this is one of the great stories from Fire and Blood, Aeria Targaryen, still quite a child, maybe a teenager at the time, claimed Balerion the Black Dread, but Balerion just flew off to old Valyria and then returned. And it turns really quite a horror story, but it seemed very clear that she did not have control over him. So, yeah, I think there's a couple of things here. Actually, gaining a bond with a dragon that has previously had a rider seems to be easier. However, that bond perhaps is not as strong. So, yeah, I don't think it's quite the sort of as simple as the amount of times makes it more difficult. I think there's an extra layer to that. Top Shelf Fandom saying the Maesters aren't unified enough to carry out an elaborate multi-generational strategy. I think, like all things in A Song of Ice and Fire, it's something more realistic, and yes, something more realistic, and yes, Maesters likely have muddled with dragons. Yeah, so one of the things that I've got various videos on sort of Maester plots. My general take is that any workable, I would agree with you, any workable Maester conspiracy is not all Maesters through all time are in on this. It has to just be the small group based down in Old Town, and they certainly seem to have a long-term plan, which is to create amongst the Maesters and the Maesters amongst the Maesters this hatred for, dislike of magic, a dismissive attitude towards magic, and the Maesters then teach the children of the Lords, and so this is the propaganda that goes out across the Seven Kingdoms. That certainly seems to be a part of their longer-term plan, because that's built into how you become a Maester. You have to pass the test at which you fail to do magic. So there's that, but I think it's very possible that at certain points, the people at the heart of the Maesters, the conclave maybe, may decide to intervene at specific points to be doing certain things. Not as part of we're the Maesters, therefore we'll always do this because, this is handed down generation to generation, but because this fits with their overall policy direction, if that kind of makes sense. Luis Acevedo saying Maester conspiracies equal tinfoil hats. Yeah, I mean, I find it hard to disagree in as much as I don't think there are any Maester conspiracies that you can definitely say, yes, there's 100% evidence for that. But at the same time, there are certainly some times when you can point at them and go, they do seem the most likely candidates. Brimpy Spingle, fun name, saying Aemond seems to have got his bravado or confidence after claiming Vhagar. Her size would instill confidence by itself, but do you think any of his attitude came from her through the bond? Interesting question. The possibly we don't know the detail of this. Is one bit of dragon lore that we're still trying to tease our way through, the extent to which the human clearly can sort of in some way imprint their desires onto the dragon. Can the dragon somehow imprint some of themselves onto the human? It's very possible. With Aemond, we're told in the books that he always was a bit like that, even when he was a young child. And he did claim Vhagar when he was quite young. So you would expect him to sort of do his growing up and gaining confidence even more so after that anyway. So I don't think, and he is this archetypal second son, that George R. Martin loves, this kind of second son idea of the first son is slightly more having to do their duty and having to inherit and rule things. The second son free from that responsibility, but perhaps a bit jealous and constrained and things like that. He's this classic. Damon's the other classic, which is why they mirror so much. So there's lots of other factors in this, but yeah, I do tend to this view that the bond has to go both ways with dragons and their riders, not just the dragon rider can imprint some of their will on the dragon, but also the dragon can start imprint some of themselves onto the rider, which adds in a whole extra layer when you start trying to think of things. To pick a random example, sorry, slight digression here, but to pick a random example, I talked about Balerion before. Balerion was the last dragon, the last living thing to have a memory of old Valyria. The last rider, the last person who bonded with Balerion was Viserys. And on the TV show, what did we see Viserys spending a huge amount of his time doing? Making a model of old Valyria. Is that just because he's got an academic interest in history and likes building Lego sets, or is that because there's something from his bond with Balerion which has just kind of imprinted itself on him? It's possible, and it's an intriguing thought. We haven't got full evidence on this yet, but I do like it. Okay, let's go to question from Catherine Furseth saying, "Hi, Robert. As some official preview clips of episode 4 seem to show, Rhaenyra now seems determined to fight for her claim, not even holding back the dragons. How do you see her personal arc going from here? In the show, perhaps somewhat differently than the book, will we see a slow downward spiral where her claim and her right is all that's left in the end? The book seems to imply so. And will we, in the end, see more clearly a parallel to Dany's story arc?" This is Daenerys from A Song of Ice and Fire, her story arc. Though I must confess, Dany's fire and blood tendencies were apparent earlier in the story than show Rhaenyra's was. Connected to this, Ranabir Mitra has said that in the video I recently did about the dragon eggs, I drew parallels between Rhaenyra and Syrax and Dany and Drogon, and how this differs from the themes of dreamers being linked to Dany via Dreamfire or Drogon. On a meta level, do you think the showrunners are taking this a step further, foreshadowing the fates of both queens by linking their dragons? Dany did eventually become the Mad Queen on the show, so by linking the dragons by parentage, are they foreshadowing a similar Mad Queen-esque ending for Rhaenyra? Okay, so these are interesting questions. The starting point here is, again, two canons. book canon and show canon. And here we're very much talking about show canon because on show canon, one of the subtle shifts that they made with those dragon eggs by saying those dragon eggs are going to be Dany's dragon eggs, we're told specifically that those are Syrax's. That's Rhaenyra's dragon. Syrax's dragon eggs. So we were just talking a moment ago about this kind of bond between dragon rider and dragon. Does that pass on into their dragon eggs? In any event, there is this symbolic thing where you get Daenerys is the person to hatch those eggs, and she is the mother of dragons, but also the mother of dragons is Syrax. So actually, Rhaenyra's dragon and Dany are kind of like both mothers of Dany's three dragons. So they're trying very clearly to be drawing this link between those two characters. And it's not just here. They've been trying to draw that link right from the very. If you remember the very beginning, they showed Daenerys was written in that very first intro few sentences that they put up onto the screen, trying to for completely casual viewers, they were trying to show the link between the show that they're about to watch and the show that they watched a few years ago. And the way they did that was basically saying, do you remember Daenerys? These are her ancestors. So this is sort of a Daenerys backstory. And as part of that, if you're just taking it from that perspective, what we've got here is we've got a queen who has been robbed of her throne, who is now going to have to take it back with fire and blood. She's got these dragons, and then she says the hope of this house is resting in these dragon eggs, which reappear much later in A Song of Ice and Fire and Daenerys. So the link across between the two is something the show are definitely trying to do. Does this mean that they're going to mirror the arc of Daenerys on the TV show with the arc of Rhaenyra on the TV show? I don't think it's going to be the same. In as much as Rhaenyra is not going to do the same thing that Dany did at the end of the TV show. But we're going to get Rhaenyra, who claims the Iron Throne briefly, probably, assuming they're sticking with what happens in the book. And then everything is just going to be, King's Landing is going to be sort of collapsing around her ears, which is a bit, and so she is going to be ruling over, dust and ashes in the same way that Dany effectively was ruling over dust and ashes. So there's going to be an echo going on there. What I will find intriguing with Rhaenyra's story is that the way George R. R. Martin set it up in book canon is, I think, echoes of Rhaenyra playing through to Cersei, actually. So I have a feeling that Cersei is going to find herself ruling King's Landing for a short period of time. I think that she will get hounded out by the people, by the small folk, in the same way that in the book, Rhaenyra was effectively hounded out by the small folk, by the people. So I think that's the echo that George R. R. Martin is most bringing up. However, they've made Rhaenyra a lot more sympathetic a character in the show than was on the book. And so her being hounded out, I suspect they will show as not just really a bad management of King's Landing, which was the way that they kind of showed it. Yes, she was dealt a really bad hand, but the implication was that she and her appointments, particularly Lord Celtigar in charge of the money, did a really bad job. And if only she'd been a bit better of a ruler, less cruel, taking less money off of people in taxes, then the people would not have turned on her. Don't think they're quite going to go down that route. Cindy saying, do we know if George's Dragon Lord draws anything from Robin Hobbs, seeing how he got inspiration about warging from her. It would be cool to compare their dragons too. I don't know on that. I mean, I love Robin. For those who don't know, the Farseer trilogy, and well, it's more than just a trilogy now. I forget what the entire. I think it's a trilogy of trilogies. In fact, excellent books anyway, and very good writing friends. Started writing their books at the same time. Robin Hobb obviously finished a lot more than George R. R. Martin managed. I think they even shared an editor, and the links between the books are very strong in some areas. Six duchies, seven kingdoms. Main character being the bastard born son of the heir to the throne, who has some magical abilities, but also um, uh, prophecy surrounding him, and has warging abilities and a bond with a wolf. There's a lot of links across. So, is there a potential link across with the dragons, because dragons do appear in that as well? Not that I'm aware of, but that's not saying that that's definitely not the case. James Dowsett saying, "Good evening, Robert. Saw a post in Reddit and someone had worked out Dany was like 1% Targaryen, going back to Aegon the Conqueror." Yeah, well, as I say, I hadn't done the full maths on it. I'd literally just gone back 3 or 4 generations, and just in that, you can see that she's at most 1/8, which is, I don't know what percentage that is, but it's more than 1%. But I'm going to say 12.5%. So that's just going back a few generations. And if you go back even further than that, then yes, you can probably argue that it's even lower. Right, let's go. Andrew K saying, with Dany's eggs, it also makes more sense to me that Alyssa Farman got them out of the realm before the Maester's egg poisoning or corruption plans, so still magically viable to hatch via Dany. Well, yeah, I agree with you. I much prefer the Alyssa Farman ones, and it completely makes sense that they are out, but before the Maesters did. And even if you don't agree that the Maesters poisoned all the dragons during the Regency period, then something happened to the dragon eggs during that period. If it wasn't the Maesters and if it wasn't poisoning, then it was something else happened. After that point, dragon egg hatching was no longer viable. So it makes perfect sense if it's List Farm. This could also make sense if you say that the turning point, the Maesters, whatever it was, happens during the Regency. If these do end up getting over to Essos in one way or another before the end of the Dance of the Dragons, then they won't have been poisoned, so that would still work. I mean, this is just one of those things. It's show canon, book canon. They've made some changes. I understand why they made some changes. I prefer the book version, but I'm not going to get too worked up about this one. I don't think it's I don't think it's worth it. Okay. Let's go to Matthew Stewart saying, just popping in to say howdy. Howdy to you too. I can't say howdy in my accent, but hello. Kelly Summers, do you think that Arax and Vhagar, rather than acting purely on their own, were taking the uninhibited impulses of their riders? The dragons lack the caution of lesser beings. Yes, I mean, this is certainly the working theory on when people are talking about the show after that episode. When you get Vhagar and Arax, was that this wasn't just the dragons, doing their own thing. It was they could sense what the riders' kind of mood was, and so they were going along with it. And so the kind of mental bond was there, even if they were disobeying the vocal command, they were obeying the command of the heart. I kind of get that, but at the same time, my reading of that situation was Lucerys just wanted to get away. And that was what he wanted. He did not want Arax to be in any way getting involved in a fight with Vhagar. Why would you? And my reading of Aemon's mindset was that he was just wanting to be spooking Arax and Lucerys. I don't think that he was actually, just judging from the look on his face when what happened. I don't think he in any way was hoping or wanting that to happen. So I think that the dragons weren't going with what the kind of the base desire or feel of their riders was at that point. I think this was just that it's on a slightly more complex level. I think that the two riders, or Aemond in particular, was creating a conflict situation which put the dragons, just got their blood up, and that just they couldn't control them at that point. It's like um, if you have a wild animal and then you prod it with a stick lots, then what's going to happen? That's that's the kind of feel I got. Okay, let's go to Lord Medici saying, "Seven blessings, Robert. Thank you, and to you. I wanted to ask you about King Jaehaerys the First's Targaryen's choices for Hand of the King. For someone with such political savvy, his choices for appointees as Hand of the King seem questionable to me. Some of the people he appointed were disastrous as hands, such as Ryam Redwine. And then we have Otto Hightower, who was a bit of a nobody when he was picked. Surely it would have been sounder to appoint someone like, say, Boromund Baratheon, who had a record of loyalty to the crown and component administration, and whose charisma made him well liked amongst the nobility. I'd love to hear your thoughts." Well, yeah, I mean, I will happily go through the Hands of the King quickly for Jaehaerys the First. On Well, okay, let's do that, and then I'll provide my extra comments. So there are, hang on, one, two. I had to write these down. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven here. So he did seven. He had seven Hands of the King. Now the first two he did not appoint. Rhaegar Baratheon and Daemon Velaryon he did not appoint. He had a regency when he first took over. He was underage, and so his mother was basically ruling along with Rhaegar Baratheon. So he didn't choose either of those first two. His first choice was this guy called Miles Smallwood, who basically he came into power and they said, okay, you need a Hand of the King. Yeah, how about this guy? And Jaehaerys seems to have gone, okay, I see no reason. He'd been staying in Dragonstone. This is what he did for the first few years. He and Alicent, while they were in their minority, before they could actually inherit, they stayed on Dragonstone. So they weren't really involved in the politics of King's Landing. And so having just come in, it's not like he had a favourite somewhere that he could say, you come in here and help me out. He went with what his advisors said. And that turned out not to be a great choice. And he lasted 3 years. After which he appointed Septon Bath, who I think most people would accept was probably the finest Hand of the King the Seven Kingdoms have had. Certainly very able as a lawmaker, as an advisor, as somebody who seemed even to know kind of the deeper lore of sort of dragon lore and things like that. He lasted 40 years, did Septon Bath. After that, that's when you get Ryam Redwine, who was the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, who very old at this point, very respected, had been at the time the greatest, or earlier when he was younger, the greatest knight in the Seven Kingdoms. Gets appointed, is pretty rubbish, and then gets sacked within a year. Following that, then Jaehaerys made Balon, who was his heir, he made him Hand of the King. That lasted for just a couple of years, I think. Again, until Balon died, at which point we have the Great Council, and then after that, Otto Hightower gets appointed. So what do we make of this? Well, I think the first thing you have to say about this is that most of his time as king, his hand was septum bath, and that was fine. The first two were not his choice, so I don't think we can judge him one way or the other on that. Which leaves us just with 4. I would argue that Balon seems to have been quite a good choice. It's just that he unfortunately died. Miles Smallwood, he picked on the advice of other people, lasted just 3 years and got rid of him. Ryan Redwine was a bad choice, lasted less than a year, then he got rid of him. Otto Hightower, by this point, Charis was very old, and was he really that in control of what was going on? It appears not. We're told basically when Balon was Hand of the King, he was mostly running the Seven Kingdoms himself. So Charis had largely taken a step back by this point. So out of the 7 there, I would say 2 definitely aren't his choice. 2 I would count as being good or even great choices. 2 were pretty poor choices, but he got rid of them quite quickly. And then 1 was Otto Hightower when he was probably a little bit too old. And it turns out Otto Hightower, whatever happened later, he was definitely a very clever and able administrator. So overall, I don't think his choice of Hands of the King were that bad. When he did choose a bad one, he saw the error of his ways quickly and changed back. Mitra, yes, you're very right on your Manchester United analogy there. I won't read it out so as not to bore other people, but I found that amusing. Disputed Lands Amanda, hi, great to see you there. Best hand, hands down. I'm going to assume you're talking about Septum Bath there. For those who don't know, Amanda Disputed Lands, do check out her channel. Excellent, one of the finest channels out there. I'm sure somebody will put a link to it in the chat if you're here watching live. Actually, which reminds me, because sometimes on these slightly shorter live streams, I get to the end and realize I haven't done it. Moderators, thank you. You're amazing. If you're watching this live, the reason why you're having such a great time in the chat, and the reason why we're not getting attacked by bots, the reason why there's a very supportive atmosphere there, people being able to exchange ideas and talk about the things that we love, is because the moderators have created that environment. They are amazing. If you are there in the live chat, could you just show them a little bit of love? Just send them a few hearts or something. That would be much appreciated. Also for me, another thanks from me is to my patrons. This is why I answer questions from my patrons as a priority, because I can't do what I do without your support. So thank you very much. Talking of which, let's go to another question from one of my patrons, Lord Medici, again saying, following up on the issue of hands, why hasn't Rhaenyra named a hand yet? It would make things easier to manage while also being a symbol of legitimacy. I know she eventually does name Corlys Velaryon in the books after taking King's Landing, but why not before? Renly or Stannis never took King's Landing and named hands anyway. Yeah, it's an interesting one. So basically in the book, the way it's written says that she was, and the words change a little bit, but she'd lost her children. She was distraught. She wasn't really in control of the situation. And the clear implication is that people like Daemon were running the show behind the scenes. He doesn't in the book. Daemon does leave a bit earlier. He heads over to Harrenhal. He starts amassing armies and things. So actually, there's not that huge breakdown that we've seen on the show. He seems to be doing things there in terms of managing the forces on the mainland. So in the book, the implication is, and whether we think this is just the Maesters with their agenda or not, the implication is that she wasn't in a fit and sound mind to be doing that until such time as she was kind of pushed into it. And Jace had a role in that as much as anything else. On the show, uh, there is an element of that, and she has been through some pretty traumatic times already, it has to be said. But yeah, I think I would agree with you. I would make 2 points here. Firstly, I would agree with you that yes, she probably should have picked a hand. Um, the Black Council is operating a bit better than the Green Council, but still, if she's not there, and there have been certain chunks of time when she's not been around for various reasons, looking for Luke's body, etc., and they've been kind of paralyzed without somebody left in charge with decision-making authority. And that has definitely been an issue. So I think that would be the first thing. But the second thing to say is this is actually still a relatively short period of time. She hasn't yet, at this moment in time, that what we've seen from the trailer does seem to imply that she's now reached that moment, but she hasn't yet at this moment in time decided that it is inevitable that she's going to have a war. So perhaps she was just waiting. So yeah, I think there's levels to this. I agree, on point of principle, that it actually would have been better just in terms of good governance for her to be appointing a hand of the king, but there are mitigating circumstances. Fana, didn't Jace name Corlys Hand after Rook's Rest in the books? Yeah, he did. So he had basically um Corlys gets angry in the book. I don't know how they're going to play this on the show, but Corlys gets angry in the book that he basically said, why did my wife have to go out? Why didn't you go with her? Why didn't you go? We've got all these dragons. What's going on? And in order to keep him on side, Jace basically says, look, this guy's hand of the king now. And so that's what happens in the book. Whether they go with it that way, I don't know. He is one of the few people who you think now has got the clear authority in Rhaenyra's absence to be taking control. The Black Council does not seem to be 100% subservient, just waiting for Rhaenyra. They all seem to have views on things, which is as you want your council to be like. They all seem to have very strong views. So it's a matter of who is it who could actually keep them in order, and certainly Corlys seems to be there. I see no reason why he won't be named hand at some point in the next few episodes. Let's put it that way. Let's go to Mimi K-Cat or Keycat, saying, how will Helena's depicted character difference in the show versus book post Charis have a ripple effect on other characters' choices and therefore future events? Does it hint that there will be other major departments in the show version? So this is interesting again. So they've made, for a show that is broadly sticking to the kind of the meta story quite well, there are quite a lot of changes sort of under the bonnet. And when I say it's sort of under the bonnet, I mean things that, unless you sort of read your way through the books in a nerdy level of detail that people like me do, you don't go, hang on a minute, I love the way that Eve Best has portrayed Rhaenys, but that's not exactly how she comes across in the book. Or they really have softened Daemon quite a lot. They did in the first season anyway. He's got a little bit harsher again this second season. So that kind of level of detail. One of the things that is very noticeable in the book is that after Blood and Cheese, Helena, well, I put some of the quotes here. We're told, afterwards she would not eat, nor bathe, nor leave her chambers. Helena sank deeper and deeper into madness, spent her days in darkness, weeping, a broken woman. So basically, she doesn't do, and she doesn't impact on the plot at all after Blood and Cheese, Helena. She locks herself in her room. She doesn't see anyone. She doesn't talk to anyone. She doesn't want to eat. She doesn't want to engage with anything. That's not how they played this on the show. Um, she has already had a lot more interaction with people just in the couple of episodes we've seen, and I have a feeling that she will probably have more of a role going forward. She's not going to be just looking herself in a room and we don't see from her again until yet more tragedy happens in a season or two's time. That's not where I think they're taking this character. So what does that mean? Well, one thing here is we haven't had Maelor yet. If you read George R. R. Martin's latest blog, he's written a couple recently. He did talk about Maelor the Missing. He has thoughts about Blood and Cheese. He didn't say what they were. He has thoughts about Blood and Cheese. The implication is that he, like many of us, thought they delivered that well on screen, but it was missing the psychological drama of having this extra element with Maelor, and I, he doesn't want to or like, and he may even legally not be allowed to criticize the show. But what he can do is just sort of like hint at things, and he has definitely hinted that he's noticed the absence of Maelor. What uh, Ryan Condal has said is that Maelor does not yet exist in this timeline, which hints that maybe Maelor will exist. Uh, Maybe Helena will be pregnant. Maybe she will get. Maybe we're going to get a newborn Maelor appearing at some point at the end of this season, beginning of next season. Who knows? That would be. That would add a whole extra layer to what happens with Maelor. If you remember what happens with him in the book, if he is literally a newborn child who gets taken from his mother, that would add extra layers of tragedy. So that's one thing. There's another thing is clearly the prophecy. They're loving using the prophecies with Helena. I think we'll be seeing more of that. And he did also say, I think it was the interview with History of Westeros, Ryan Condal did say, yes, some people, or at least somebody, has noticed, leaving us to wonder who might have noticed. Aemond, perhaps? Larys, perhaps? Who knows? Somebody's noticed this. So there are things that are going on there. The other thing to note, actually, with one of George R. R. Martin's um, blog posts is that he says a lot of nice things about a lot of the actors on the show. He sort of singles out a few. He kind of agreed. I say he agreed with me. Makes it sound like he heard what I said and said, "Oh yes, that Robert's." No, he. I share his view on Lisa Vance with episode 2 was astonishingly good, and but one actor that he particularly singles out is Fia. Is it Lacey? I can't remember her name. Someone in the chat will remind me, I'm sure. The actress playing Helena, who he basically says this is adding a whole extra layer. Credit to her, credit to the writers. This is adding an extra layer to this character, better than the character I've got in my books, which is, I think, I did tweet this out actually a day or so ago because I think this is worthy of sharing as praise from George R. R. Martin. It's quite rare that he says this is a better character than in my books. I think there's 4 now. Osha and Shay in the main Game of Thrones TV series, Viserys and now Helena in House of the Dragon. He praises plenty of other actors for bringing characters to life, but in terms of adding extra layers to a character so that he now wishes that character was what was in the book, those 4 are, I think, the only 4 that he's said that for. Fia Saban, thank you very much, Agrit, and a few other people. So yeah, all credit for her. Okay, let's go to yeah, Gabriel Miller saying Osha's good in the book too. Yeah, one thing, and this is one of those things where I watched an old video on this, and then it struck me. Actually, the book that George R. R. Martin is talking about is the book we're still waiting for. He did this interview about, and in passing, he talked about Osha, and he said, yeah, she added the actress there, whose name I can't forget. I can't remember either. I'm terrible with names, but he said added so much extra layer to that character that when I write about that character next in the book, I'm going to have to add in more because of what's happened there. I now feel I understand that character better. So yeah, it was really quite touching. For Shay, for those who are interested, he's did as a sort of a comment. I think he went out with the actress there and said simply, her Shay is better than my Shay, because his Shay, he said, was basically just that she was using. And this is what he didn't say these exact words. I'm digressing a lot. Apologies, but he said that his Shay that he'd written, then she was just this sex worker who was trying to get money, and she may have cared for Tyrion a bit, but not hugely. But on the show, there was an extra layer there of understanding and love, which hadn't come across in the book. And he thought that that worked better than his version. Let's go to Ranabin Mitra, thank you. Natalia Tenner is the Osha actress. Thank you very much. Always like to give these people credit, but I quite often forget their names. So hopefully, Mimi Cake, that answered your question. I did go off into a little bit of a digression on that one, but James Horner saying, "Hello, Robert. I saw your tweet about Stannis's position on the dance, but this seems to go against his obsession with duty. Rhaenyra's father named her his successor, so surely it would be the people's duty to carry out the king's wishes and crown her, especially as they don't seem to have had any hard and fast rules about succession." So this was another tweet I did a day or two ago, which entirely ran. I hadn't thought about this at the time when I put it out, but this seems to have it's certainly been my most commented on tweet I've done for a good couple of years. I stumbled across a quote from Stannis talking to Davos, where he basically calls Rhaenyra a traitor, and he says that she was killed for being a traitor because, you know, she tried to usurp the throne from her brother. And I just sort of tweeted out Stannis was Team Green, which I thought was quite funny. But did seem to sort of set a lot of people debating that point. The context for that quote was that this is when Davos is quite early on Clash of Kings. Davos has been he's or was it Clash of Kings, or was it no, it's the Storm of Swords, I think, actually. Davos is after the Battle of the Backwater. He's come back. He's been in prison for a bit. He gets pulled up to see Stannis, and Stannis is debating what to do with a traitor, and he basically says, "I don't make the rules. Traitors have to be killed. You know me, I follow the rules. This is what happens." And then he lists this whole series of people in history who were traitors and they had to be killed. And then he says, even Rhaenyra was killed, or a traitor's death, I think was what he said. So the first point there is that whereas, yes, this is definitely Stannis's position, it's an aside. This isn't something that he's clearly given huge amounts of thought to. I think that he's just taken the history books and said, okay, so who are the rightful kings by history? Which, if you in world, Rhaenyra was not rightful ruler. She's been taken out. Aegon II took her out of the list of rulers of Westeros. Yes, she sat and ruled in King's Landing for 6 months, but he wiped her out and nobody put her back in. Not even Aegon III. We've not had an explanation for that yet. The implication is that he was too traumatized by what happened to do that, and then by that point the list of rulers was set. But so she was not ever in the official list of rulers, which 170 years later will have come down as being okay. So Stannis, who seems to have been a reasonable student, but he's certainly not a maester, understanding all of the subtleties of history, he will have seen, okay, so what did you have? You had Viserys, and then you had Aegon II, and then you had Aegon III, and where's Rhaenyra? She clearly was not in this line of rulers. So I don't actually think that Stannis would necessarily be Team Green if he were alive at this moment in time, but having looked through the histories from his own position in time, he thinks that the rightful ruler was Aegon II, and therefore the attempted usurper was Rhaenyra. Let's go to a question from Lady Pushkins. Going back a bit in the story, how do you feel about Viserys being poisoned? He seems to rot away, and I'm thinking about how the Hightowers are tied in historically with the Maesters. Could they be involved in this? Okay, so we're back with the Maester conspiracy theories again, which I love. I think so. On the show, Paddy Considine, who played Viserys, did say that this was leprosy, not poisoning. So I think that we're not expected to think that. There were a couple of hints on the show that maybe there was something going on, but these could just be showing that there's some people with suspicious minds. Damon at one point kind of sniffed something that Viserys had been drinking, just to sort of check what it was. And Viserys accuses Otto potentially of killing his father as well, which is just okay. So there are kind of like, they drop a few things in there, leave it as a possibility, but it's never really played through. In the book, it's not. Basically, we just get the impression that he just sort of got older and less well. He was a very large, very fat man. He didn't look after himself, and basically, he was going to die at some point. So, as a kind of a working assumption, I think we're supposed to think that he probably wasn't. Probably wasn't just poison. Okay, let's kill him tonight. Nothing seems to imply that that was the way this worked, because it wasn't. The coup attempt did not look like people had foreknowledge of it. The main actors had foreknowledge of it. But in terms of keeping him sedated for long periods of time, and knowing that he was going to be dying at some point and not really doing everything you can to bring him back to full health, yes, all of those things, you could probably point the fingers at people like Otto, certainly on the show, Otto and Alicent, and the Maesters. They're keeping him in this dark room, comatose for most of the time, so that they could rule the land. Okay. Yes, the show is in about 2 hours' time. Those who are asking. Let's go to. I've got a couple more questions. 444. As I am myself, this is what 444 says, as I am myself, pardon me, a person who is on the autism spectrum, I would like to comment about Helena. This is something that we've had a few questions on over the last few weeks. First, a disclaimer: not everyone on the spectrum has the same characteristics and same intensity of them. Having some traits will not necessarily mean that someone must be on the spectrum. Helena has a lot of traits that indicate being on the spectrum, like issues with expressing and experiencing emotions, issues with social interaction in new environments, when meeting new people, specific and unusual interests like bug collecting, my interpretation of Helena's behavior during the Blood and Cheese event is that she believes in rules and order, which means that when you believe in some rule, you do not want to break it. You really stick with it. She probably did not understand her dreams in advance, but she knew that when they came, they are inevitable. I think she points at Charis because she knew that it must be true. A moment later, she wanted to take back her hand because she is a mother who wished to protect her child, but knew she can't. Um, so yeah, I mean, we talked about this a few times, and thank you very much for sharing your experience there. I do hugely appreciate that. Um, Definitely, they are portraying her as a character, as somebody who we would probably today diagnose as autistic. Um, as I said, I'm not a medical professional, so I'm not personally, I think, qualified to go to sort of diagnose her myself. But um, the way you describe this, I think that does make perfect sense to me, is that she has seen the prophecies. She thinks that, or the prophecies, she gets the visions, however this works for her, and she realizes this is what's going to be happening. She lifts up her finger, and afterwards, as kind of like a delayed reaction, comes the realization of what has happened. But then also the dissociation, which is why there's no screaming or anything like that, and she just is getting out of there. So yeah, thank you. I thought that was a really helpful addition there. Let's go to and you also asked whether I think the new tapestry from the intro was embroidered by Helena. I think no. She is shown to be doing embroidering and things like that, but I think the idea is that this embroidery is showing the history it's going to be added to as we're going through, and it's showing the history of House Targaryen, and so she that should carry on beyond her death, basically. So I don't think that we're going to sort of suddenly see that this is her doing it. I like the idea, but I think that in world, if you have this, if somebody is in world doing this, I think it's not her. Maybe she's done a part of it and others add to it. And last question from my patrons. This is Jay, picking up from where we left off last week. I've been listening to some interviews with Matthew Needham, who plays Larys Strong. He was speaking on Larys's motives being to make a huge impact. His motive to make a huge impact, using a tree analogy, saying something to the effect of, I don't think he wants to cut marks in the tree, I think he wants to cut the tree down. I know many theorize he's a green seer, but what I'm wondering is if you think Adam Valarion's visit to the Isle of Faces will reveal Larys's actual motives. And Nicole Nark saying they seem to have built Larys up quite a bit in the show, and we're still not really sure what he's up to. What plot point from Fire and Blood do you think they will contribute to Larys, or do you think they've got a completely new storyline going on for him? Well, I think I'll kind of like wrap both of these up by saying that the main point from Fire and Blood is that we never truly know his motivations. He is a mystery. I could probably find the section and read it out to you, but I'll spare you that this time. Is that he is a mystery all the way through. We don't know exactly which side he's on. Yes, he's there on the Green Council, but at the end he does seem to have a slightly shifted perspective on things. There's the possibility that he may have been Daemon's ally. That's no more than just a hint, so don't take that as definite by any stretch of the imagination. And then his willingness to accept death at the end seems quite at odds with the little that we know of him. So the whole point of his Fire and Blood narrative is that we do not understand him. One thing which is fascinating is how I find fascinating anyway, is that you're saying here about lots of people are theorizing he's a green seer. I've sort of hesitated on that. There's a lot of people that I respect who have said that this looks quite likely, and I've said, okay, I can see this, but I don't think we've got conclusive proof. I think another kind of thing to add to this is now the Harrenhal element. They have really played up clearly how magical Harrenhal is. The Weirwood tree is the centerpiece of this. The connection across to the Isle of Faces is strong. The Weirwood roots, we're told inside the episode, we're told that the Weirwood roots are reclaiming it for the old gods, and that's Larys Strong's castle. That's where he grew up. So he definitely has a connection, even if it's an understanding of the fact that there is magic out there, that the Weirwood magic is real. Even if he's not a green seer, he will understand it in a way that almost none of the Targaryens or the people who believe in the Faith of the Seven will understand it. So that is, for me, one of the biggest bits of evidence for that we've had so far. Might he therefore be connected into the Weirwood network? Might we find out stuff on the Isle of Faces? With the Isle of Faces, Adam Velaryon, we're talking about it. I think this shows quite how important this is to the community. The fact that Adam Velaryon goes to the Isle of Faces in the book canonically, and we want to see it. I still think that they won't show us many details of that, and therefore I suspect that we're not going to have him land on his dragon, climb off, and find Larys Strong's evil twin brother or whatever it is, and get a link across to Larys that way. I think with Larys, they're going to keep on just giving us hints. I think that he is clearly a social climber of some kind, somebody who wants power. Whether there's more to that, whether there's a reason behind all of that, is the thing that hopefully we will start to understand a bit more of, because he is one of the few characters here who they've made him less sympathetic than the book. All of the characters, most of the other characters, there's a few others, some like Kristen Cole is probably an obvious example, but most of the other characters, Alicent, even Otto's had his moments, Aegon, Daemon, all of them have been not necessarily softened, but we've got to see another side of them. We've got to understand a little bit more about where they're coming from, why they've done what they do. Larys, we haven't seen that. Larys, we've not got to understand anything about him, and the things that he's done have been even more seedy and weird. The feet thing, for example, than anything that was in Fire and Blood. So I hope they give us another angle of him at some point, but maybe they won't. Okay, so I think that was my last question from my my patrons. Renabin Mitra saying I'm getting the placards ready as we speak, just in case. #riot. Good. I'm very pleased to hear that. We're not, to be clear, we're not expecting that this season anyway. That should not happen until maybe the tail end of next season. So hold on to the placards for a little bit. Joe Rose saying maybe it's Helena's drawing put to tapestry. She draws on her walls and in books, maybe to try to understand her own visions. Yeah, so in terms of the visions, that definitely seems to be there. If you look at a few stills of them, you see things that, like, there's like a rat with a dagger. You see gooses geese I think attacking each other, which is the goose is a sigil of House Cargill. So there's stuff going on there that you go, yeah, this is her dreams, her visions that she has been putting down there. Uncle Gwendolyn saying just dropped in, always a fascinating listen, thank you very much. Andrew K saying with dragon control topic, on the dragon control topic, the obedience would be severely tested anyway in a dragon or in dragon combat. which I believe none of these dragons ever experienced. Yeah, it's definitely worth saying a lot of these dragons haven't experienced combat. Vhagar, however, has. So Vhagar should be fine. It's not like I'm not really a horse trainer, as you can understand. But if you get an untrained horse going into battle, then they will spook. You have to have a trained horse going into battle. Vhagar is the equivalent of a trained horse, but a bit more flying and a bit more fire breathing, obviously. Lord Medici, hi there, saying Adam Velaryon, Adam of Hull, doesn't seem a particularly magical character, not linked or interested in the old god stuff. Maybe that's why it's him who lands there. If we see the Isle through him, the Isle stays mysterious. Yeah, it's an interesting point. And this is one of the things which is most fascinating about the whole Adam Velaryon landing on the Isle of Faces. It's like completely out of the blue. It's okay, so why is he gone there? Why is he gone there now? I get maybe you're seeking some kind of wisdom, but what is there about this character that he's from, as far as we can tell, he's from Velaryon stock. Why is he connected with the old gods? Why is he fascinated? What's he seen? What's he experienced? Is he getting called there? That's the whole half of the mystery that we've got going on there. Let's go. Miss Meg's 31 saying, going back to the tapestry, I don't see how there are events from the future in it would be a deal breaker with a Dragon Dreamer. An entirely valid point. Yes, thank you very much. Glad to be put in my place on that one. And Lady Pushkin saying, I would have liked an Aemond and Helena scene. Yep. There seemed to be some sort of a connection going on there in season 1. Okay, so I think Raven Apollo saying it looks like Helena is drawing about things that happen hundreds of years in the future too, but it's in symbols, so it's difficult to tell. Okay, yeah, that's interesting thought. Right, so with that, let me tell you what's coming up on this channel over the next few days. We're going to have a breakdown episode. I think I'm going to release my breakdown episode on a Tuesday this time. That's just for my own personal timing issues. But there will be, I've got a pre-recorded episode, episode video, which will be coming out on the Monday. So you'll have your normal Monday video and a Tuesday video and another lore video later on in the week. We'll be back on this channel with usual Thursday open Q&A, so we can be talking about what happens in episode 4, which looks like it's going to be quite good. And then back here again next Sunday for the pre-show for episode 5, where by that point we'll be halfway through the season. It's going by far too quickly. Okay, moderators, thank you so much for your help today. You are absolutely amazing. Patrons, thank you again. If you're watching this back a little bit later, want some more live streams, they'll be appearing somewhere around here. If you're wanting to support this channel, then there's going to be a link appearing somewhere around here. If you have enjoyed this stream, hang around and just donate to an incredibly worthy cause. This is a charity stream. I get no money from this. YouTube gets no money from this. But if you donate, 100% of your money will go to International Rescue, who go and help the people, civilians in conflict zones, just helping those people. So please do be generous. The link will stay up there forever. I'm not taking it down. So, but you can click it now. But that is it. Take care, everyone. Enjoy the episode. It looks like it's going to be fantastic, and I will see you again soon. Bye now.